My husband always had a gentle face, even while sleeping in his casket. It seemed like he would wake up any moment if I called out to him. Well, off I go. That was my cheerful husband calling out to me and our daughter before leaving on a business trip 2 days ago. I never imagined that to be the last time I would hear his voice. He took his own life. No matter how much I called out, my husband, now cold as ice, wouldn't respond. Despite all this, I found it hard to believe what had happened. That's when I noticed a single photo placed on my husband's chest. It was a family photo I didn't remember placing there. Who could have placed this photo here? Intrigued, I picked up the photo and flipped it over. As chills ran down my spine, I turned around and locked eyes with my mother-in-law, who was looking at me with a cold gaze. At this point, I had no idea of the nightmares that awaited me.
My name is Bella, 32 years old. Both my parents passed away in a car accident when I was still in college, leaving me all alone in this world. The grief was unbearable.
At that time, my then boyfriend, was there to support me, and we got married shortly after graduating.
Our in-laws consisted of my mother-in-law and brother-in-law. My father-in-law passed away from an illness. Although it was called an illness, it was a sudden discomfort that took his life, surprising everyone in the family. It turned out to be a heart attack. Listen, my in-laws were affluent and ran a business, so we were never in a financial bind. My father-in-law had intended for his kind and considerate younger brother, who had business acumen, to take over as CEO, but he passed away suddenly before this could be realized.
I wanted me to take over, but I couldn't possibly do that over my older brother. I support him. Husband respected his brother deeply, and had no objection to giving up the position of CEO.
My brother-in-law was very kind to me as well, and would often speak to me in a friendly manner. However, I didn't have much interaction with my mother-in-law, whom I found somewhat difficult. When I just got married, my mother-in-law was very kind to me and also would cook with me, saying, "I don't have a daughter, so I love spending time with you like this." However, she suddenly turned cold when my father-in-law passed away. She turned cold to both me and my husband and would even avoid making any eye contact with us. I was perplexed, even towards Hannah, who she used to dote on as her first grandchild. She'd glare at and shut her down, even when Hannah approached her calling, "Grandma." "She used to be such a sweet person before," said my upset husband. I felt very sorry for him.
Something's off about Mom. She's glaring at me as if I'm her enemy. Oh, does she think we're after her assets? Or could she be ill or something?
My husband had been thinking deeply about his mother's change of character, but it didn't seem like he could think of any reason. In fact, we first noticed her change at my father-in-law's one-week memorial service when we were staying at her house. Exhausted from the memorial service, I was told that my mother-in-law was sick. Exhausted from the memorial service, we had slept soundly, but when we woke up, we noticed that the bag with our change of clothes we had left in the room was missing. Could it be a burglar?
Oh, it's strange that, no, it's strange that only our bag is missing. I'll look for it.
While we were searching, we saw smoke rising from the backyard through the window. In disbelief, we went to check and found our belongings being burned. And there was my mother-in-law.
You didn't do this, did you?
Mother-in-law, please answer us. But my mother-in-law said nothing. Her eyes were wide open, her lips pale white. Her hands were shaking and she seemed scared.
Mom, why'd you do this? What is it about us that you don't like?
Despite his confusion at her refusal to respond, Al leaned closer to his mother and spoke gently.
You're not worried about us going for your ass, going after your assets, are you? I'm not after your assets, so you can rest easy.
We care about you, mother-in-law. But despite our earnest appeals, mother-in-law coldly declared, "Get out of here, both of you! Don't come back." I'm baffled. We hurriedly left her house and have since become estranged, barely visiting for the past year. Much as it pained us, we felt like we couldn't reach mother-in-law, who clearly despised our family. And then one day, we received a message from my brother-in-law of the first anniversary memorial service for my father-in-law. All the relatives were gathering, so we decided to go, but my mother-in-law remained as cold as ever. Seeing this seemed to have got John thinking more frequently. What's the matter? John, are you worried about mother-in-law?
Yeah. Oh, so...
If there's anything I can do for you, just tell me.
Don't worry about it. And, Bella. You don't need to worry about anything.
My husband gently stroked my cheek as he looked into my worried eyes. His kind smile brought me great relief and soothed my feelings. About a month passed by after that.
And I'll be, and also, that's...
For Pagton, as he left for his business trip, my husband cheerfully greeted me and our daughter Hannah as usual. I forgot to give you this.
And handed me a cute little charm. This will surely protect you.
My husband flashed his gentle smile again. I thought to myself how truly grateful I was to be married to him. However, a shocking event occurred the very next day. John had taken his own life. His car was found parked on a mountain road near my parents' house in Colorado. Inside the car, my husband was frothing at the mouth, taking his last breaths. Activations and PCA, although he had told me he was on a business trip. His company said there were no trips scheduled that day. Moreover, I was told that just before his death, he had called my brother-in-law and whispered, "I can't go on. Living has become too painful." My brother-in-law repeatedly apologized to me. According to the police, traces of a poisonous plant were found in his stomach. They said that this plant grows naturally in the mountains and can be easily obtained with a little knowledge. In the end, given my brother-in-law's testimony, it was concluded that he had likely consumed it to end his own life. I bitterly blamed myself for not noticing his pain and having no clue why this happened. In front of my husband's body, I was about to collapse, but my brother-in-law supported me.
Stay strong. And, this is hard for me too. Obviously talked to mine, I wish I had been more understanding of John's feelings.
Why did this happen? Why did this happen?
Hannah, holding on to me, was also crying. but my mother-in-law was glaring at us with a pale face, showing no tears. While I was overwhelmed with grief, my brother-in-law and colleagues from the company proceeded with the funeral arrangements.
Please wake up.
On the day of the funeral, my husband, John, laid peacefully in the casket with his usual gentle expression. It seemed as if he would wake up any moment if I called out to him. As I clung to my husband, tears streamed down my cheeks. Then I noticed it. A single photo was placed on John's chest. Who could have placed this photo here? Curious, I picked up the photo to find the part of the family photo that showed John's face had been slashed mercilessly with a cutter. Etched on the back of the photo was the phrase, "Run away now." What does this mean? Who could this message be directed to? As shivers went down my spine, I turned around and locked eyes with my mother-in-law, who was glaring at me with icy eyes. Could it be? When I stared back, she hurriedly averted her gaze. At that moment, I felt my mother-in-law knew something, so I discreetly slipped the photo into the pocket of my morning dress without anyone noticing. After the funeral, once things had calmed down a bit, I started to think again about the photo. I still didn't know who had put the photo in the casket, but I thought the ESAs in the message might be someone's initial. The only person I could think of with a name starting with Zabiuzwi with Surmet, my mother-in-law. Klaus, I'd always found it hard to believe that John would take his own life and leave me and our daughter, Hannah, behind. I have been hoping to find out any reason, however small. That's why I decided to bravely visit my mother-in-law. When I arrived at her house, she greeted me with the same cold expression. Unfortunately, my brother-in-law was at work and wasn't home, so it was just the two of us.
Well, I was hoping to find out more about why John passed away. I thought there might be some clue here at his childhood home.
I didn't have the courage to confront her directly, so I ended up lying on the spot. As I was looking for a topic of conversation, I glanced up at the large bookshelf that covered one wall of the living room. The bookshelf, a product of the book-loving family, was filled not only with novels but also encyclopedias and dictionaries. There were also a few books that John had read during his student days, and I couldn't help but pick up a few out of nostalgia. Each book had a stamp at the end of every page to indicate who it belonged to. Ellen next to John's initial EJ was a small cuddling cat. That's so like him, I thought, and a smile involuntarily escaped my lips. However, I could feel the cold stare of my mother-in-law on my back as I continued to flip through the books. Suddenly, I noticed a book that still had a cover on it. Picking it up, it was a book on poisonous plants. There were several post-it notes in it, and when I opened one, it was about the poisonous plant that my husband had used. At the last page of the book, there was also a stamp of ownership.
The mother-in-law, what is the meaning of this?
That is, when I confronted her with the book, she burst into tears.
The truth that my mother-in-law confessed was simply shocking.
Please, tell the police.
Yes, I understand.
And so, I reported it to the police. Just then, my brother-in-law, who was unaware of the situation, returned home. Seeing the sorrowful look on my mother-in-law's face, he asked with a worried expression, "What happened? Even Bella is here. Did something happen? I wanted to discuss about my husband with my mother-in-law." Packs of pieces as I was mumbling and looking down, unable to tell my brother-in-law the truth, he began to speak something unexpected. "I know it's an odd time to say this, but I've always had feelings for you. Bella, I also think Hannah is adorable." I was surprised by this sudden revelation. I never expected my brother-in-law to have such feelings for me.
Thank you, brother-in-law, but I can't think about such a thing right now.
Yeah, I understand. As I handed him the photograph, while he shyly scratched his head and said, "I'm sorry." When my brother-in-law saw the photo of my husband's face badly beaten and the words "run away now" on the back, he turned pale and gasped.
This was found inside my husband's coffin.
Who could do such a thing? It seems like among the people who came to the funeral, there might have been someone who knows who harmed my husband. Hold on a minute. John took his own life, so there's no such thing as a culprit. My brother-in-law seems bewildered, his eyes darting restlessly.
But in my dreams, my husband screams, "I've been duped by that guy. I hate him."
His eyes widen at my words, staring at me with a shocked expression, as if he has seen something terrifying.
Also, I found this in the bookshelf in the living room.
I showed him the book about poisonous plants that I had found earlier, pointing to the owner's book plate, which read my brother-in-law's name. A stamp with the letter K, initial for Ken. What are you trying to say? Are you implying that I murdered my brother? Instead, I continued my story. My mother-in-law, who had been silent and looking down beside me, was holding her breath and watching how things were unfolding.
And take a look at this.
I took out my little charm that I had received from my husband and pulled out a letter from inside it. It read, "My brother killed our father with a poisonous plant." I was so grief-stricken by my husband's death that I had been clutching the charm he gave me throughout his funeral. It was then that I realized there was something inside it from the outer covering. Such a thing, that's not a valid evidence. I pulled out my phone and started playing a video. It showed a conversation between my husband and my brother-in-law. In the video, my brother-in-law admitted that he took his father's life on purpose. He even said to my husband, "I'm not coming after your family. I will turn myself into the police." When my husband decided to talk to my brother-in-law, he secretly set up a camera in their parents' house. This was also written in the letter from my husband. When I first saw this, I was filled with regret and rage.
You confessed your crime to my husband, then reassured him to turn yourself in, only to take his life using the same poisonous plant, didn't you? Untrusted you until the very end. Why did you do such a thing?
As I pressed him, my brother-in-law clicked his tongue in frustration, his expression shifting from gentle to terrifying as he glared at me. At that moment, my mother-in-law burst into tears, sobbing out loud. Why such a cruel thing? My mother-in-law had just confessed everything to me. The brothers were very close during their childhood. Yet over time, it seems that the older brother, my brother-in-law, grew envious of his talented younger brother, John, and started to mess with him with petty pranks, like hiding and damaging his precious possessions. Just aware of this, my in-laws disciplined my brother-in-law strictly. However, John himself never blamed his brother for anything that happened, and instead, he continued to admire my brother-in-law. This disheartened my mother-in-law. And then, after my father-in-law passed away, while cleaning the bookshelf, my mother-in-law found a book about poisonous plants. Although my husband was diagnosed with a heart attack, he had never been warned of any heart issues in his previous medical checkups. So, I had a feeling that something wasn't right. And then I noticed the bookmark in the book. It had the exact symptoms my husband had before he passed away. It was truly shocking. Vegetable, although it was covered, my brother-in-law seemed to be deeply engrossed in that book about poisonous plant. Furthermore, she discovered a photo of John's face cut up with a box cutter hidden within the pages of the book. However, without any further concrete evidence, and knowing that my brother-in-law wouldn't admit anything when confronted, my mother-in-law chose not to push the matter. Next, at my father-in-law's memorial service, when we visited the family home, it seems my mother-in-law was deeply shaken to find my brother-in-law burning our bags. So, to keep us away from the family home, just in case, my mother-in-law deliberately turned cold towards us. She explained this while speaking in a pained voice, her face deeply lined with worry, and I found myself at a loss for words. Even though we stopped visiting their home and she felt relieved, my brother-in-law's expression became more and more grim, murmuring to himself, "I have to do something about John." So I tried to warn you about it. At my husband's first memorial, I passed a message to run away now, using the photo found in the book about poisonous plants. I also whispered to John that Ken might have killed their father, but unfortunately seems to have backfired. Had my husband not known, he probably would not have gone to meet my brother-in-law, and things wouldn't have turned out this way. My mother-in-law regretted and blamed herself for everything. I couldn't respond to her words.
So because our father decided not to let me take over the company.
But John always said that he couldn't become the president by pushing you aside.
Like, I care.
And both your father and John loved you. You didn't have to go this far.
What's the point now? Arjun's parents who only doted on my younger brother are to blame, and so is the good boy acting John. All your fault, your fault.
My brother-in-law laughed it off, bearing a defiant expression that sent chills down my spine.
How dare you take away my dear husband? I will never forgive you.
And shut up. If you hadn't meddled, I might have even made you my wife.
Suddenly, my enraged brother-in-law pulled out a knife he'd been hiding and started coming at me. I cried out, "Help!" and tried to escape, but my brother-in-law was quick and soon stood right in front of me, cornered and facing a raised knife. I instinctively closed my eyes, and at that moment, a loud thud hit. Someone jumped in to protect me. It was my mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law, are you okay?
She grimaced and held her arm, from which blood was seeping. Thicken, please stop doing these awful things. Please turn yourself in.
That you became the CEO you always wanted to be. Why would you go this far?
I need money.
My brother-in-law, having taken over the company, had no managerial talent as predicted by my father-in-law, and had accrued substantial debt within a year. He was now in desperate need of money. He even took out a high-value life insurance policy on my husband, his younger brother.
It's funny. I'll believe me easily when I said I was gonna turn myself in.
My brother-in-law laughed in an ugly guffaw. I couldn't help but feel intense revulsion at his demeanor.
But he was still cautious enough not to drink the wine I handed him, a toast to our parting, being suspicious of poisonous herbs. However, he did shake my head, which had small substances of the herb. You know, John had a habit of licking his hands, right? Also, it seems it started to take effect in the car on the way home.
Feeling empowered, my brother-in-law revealed everything while flamboyantly waving a knife at us.
My husband still wanted to save you. Why didn't you understand that feeling?
Like I wouldn't know. It's all my parents' fault for favoring John over me.
That's when the police, who had been called earlier, arrived. My brother-in-law kept struggling to the end, pleading I did nothing wrong. Forgive me. Overlook this. At my sudden outburst, my brother-in-law gasped, finally calmed down, and was taken away by the police. Fortunately, my mother-in-law's injury was not serious. In the end, my brother-in-law showed no signs of remorse, and it's likely he will remain behind bars. I'm now living with my mother-in-law at her place. My mother-in-law has returned to her old kind self and is loving towards my daughter, Tana. We are happily living together, and the letter and the charm had more to it. Bella, you are my treasure. I love you always. Embracing my husband's feelings, I've decided to keep living.